Runway. It's a global icon that brings us back.
Hello?
Well, look what TJ...
Runway at the same time, Miranda.
Really?
His eyebrows, though, didn't you?
The Devil Wears Prada 2 is a 2026 American comedy drama film directed by David Frankel and written by Aline Brosh McKenna, a sequel to the 2006 film. Both David Frankel and Aline Brosh McKenna were part of the original film, so they came back knowing exactly what made the first one so special. They were not strangers hired to continue someone else's work. These were the same people who built the world the first time around. That matters a lot. That is why this film feels connected to its predecessor in such a real and personal way. The original Devil Wears Prada came out in 2006. It was based on a novel by Lauren Weisberger published in 2003. Weisberger herself had worked as an assistant to Anna Wintour, the real-life editor-in-chief of Vogue magazine, and her experiences inspired the story. The novel became a massive hit. The movie became an even bigger cultural moment. The first movie starred Hathaway as aspiring journalist Andy Sachs, who lands a job assisting Miranda Priestley, the formidable editor-in-chief of top fashion magazine Runway. As Andy struggles to survive Miranda's demands, she also tries to balance her personal life. The film grossed $327 million worldwide and became a lasting pop culture phenomenon. Now, almost 20 years later, the world has changed. The fashion industry has changed. The media world has changed. Journalism has changed. And these beloved characters have changed along with it. That is the heart of the sequel. It does not pretend that time has stood still. It looks time in the face and asks a very serious question. What happens to powerful people and powerful institutions when the world moves on without them? The Devil Wears Prada 2 is 1 hour and 59 minutes long. Nearly 2 full hours of fashion, drama, sharp dialogue, big feelings, and a story that is both familiar and completely new. The genre is comedy drama. It is funny in places, genuinely funny. The kind of humor that comes from people who know these characters deeply. But it is also a drama. There are real stakes, real emotions, real sadness sitting underneath the glamour. The movie does not shy away from that. It lets both things live together, which is exactly what good comedy drama does. The casting calls the movie called it by the title cerulean, referring to the color used in a famous monologue given by Meryl Streep's character Miranda Priestley about the cultural reach of the fashion industry. That detail alone tells you everything. The people who made this film love the original. They chose a code name that honored one of the most iconic scenes from the first movie. That is not an accident. That is devotion. Now, let us talk about the production. Development on the film began in July 2024, with all 4 leading actors signing on to reprise their roles, and Frankel and McKenna returning to direct and write respectively. Principal photography took place from June to October 2025 in Manhattan and Milan, with additional filming in Newark, New Jersey. So this was a real production. Months of filming. Real locations. New York City and Milan, 2 of the fashion capitals of the world, both of which featured prominently in the original film as well. Despite the success of The Devil Wears Prada, starring cast members Streep and Hathaway were initially hesitant on the prospect of a sequel. That hesitation makes the film even more meaningful. These were not actors who jumped at the chance to make more money off a beloved title. These were serious artists who needed to believe in the story before they would return to it. And eventually they did believe. Eventually, the right story came along. That story is what we are here to talk about today. Before we walk into the story itself, let's understand the world that this movie is set in, because the world matters enormously here. When the original Devil Wears Prada was released in 2006, print magazines were still powerful. Vogue, Runway, these publications set the tone for culture. They decided what was fashionable and what was not. The editor-in-chief of a major fashion magazine was one of the most feared and respected people in any room. That power was real. That world was real. Now it is 2026. The world looks very different. Print magazines are struggling. Many have shut down entirely. The internet took over everything. Social media turned every person with a phone into a content creator. Influencers, young people with millions of followers, now hold the kind of power that magazine editors once held. The old guard of the fashion industry is being asked to justify its existence in a world that has largely moved on from the old ways. The Devil Wears Prada 2 explores the decline of traditional magazine publishing and the rise of influencer culture and fast fashion. Miranda Priestley struggles to maintain Runway magazine's relevance and advertising revenue in an increasingly digital world. This is not just a backdrop. This is the beating heart of the film. The story is about survival. It is about what you do when everything you built your life around starts to crumble. It is about whether a person like Miranda Priestley, a woman who defined an era, can adapt to a world that does not need her in the same way anymore. And it is about whether Andy Sachs, who once ran away from that world, can find her way back to it. Andy Sachs returns to Runway as Miranda Priestley navigates a new media landscape and Runway's position within it. They reconnect with another former assistant, Emily, who is now the head of a luxury brand that possesses funding which could ensure Runway's survival. So the 3 women at the center of the original film are back together. Miranda, Andy, Emily. 3 very different women. 3 very different journeys. But all of them connected by the same institution, the same magazine, the same impossible legacy that is Runway. As Miranda Priestley nears retirement, she reunites with Andy Sachs to face off against her former assistant-turned-rival, Emily Charlton. The word retirement is significant here. In the first film, Miranda Priestley was untouchable. She was the queen of her world. No one could touch her. Now, she is approaching the end of her career. The same woman who once made grown adults tremble with a glance is now fighting to hold on to her legacy before time takes it away from her. That is a deeply human thing to explore, and it gives Meryl Streep material that goes far beyond what she was asked to do in the original. Let us also talk about the new characters being introduced. The film reunites the original main cast with director David Frankel and writer Aline Brosh McKenna, and introduces an all-new runway of characters, including Kenneth Branagh, Simone Ashley, Justin Theroux, Lucy Liu, Patrick Bramall, Caleb Heron, Helen J. Shun, Pauline Chalamet, BJ Novak, and Conrad Ricamora. Each of these new characters adds a layer to the story. Kenneth Branagh plays Miranda's new husband. Justin Theroux appears in the film. Simone Ashley brings her presence to the world of Runway. Lucy Liu is part of this story. These are not small additions. These are real characters with real roles to play. Now, let us step into the story itself. Imagine the city of New York. It is 2026. The streets are still the same in some ways. The energy is still there, but so much has changed. The giant magazine stands that used to overflow with glossy covers now carry mostly digital device ads. The city's fashion scene is still alive, but it has a different energy. It is louder, faster, more influenced by social media than by the high halls of old magazine empires. We open on Andy Sachs, played once again by Anne Hathaway, who is now a serious journalist. She is not the wide-eyed girl who walked into Runway wearing the wrong shoes all those years ago. She has grown up. She has lived a real life. She has done real work. She is confident, smart, and still carries that warmth that made audiences fall in love with her in the first film. But there is something in her face that tells you she has not forgotten. She never forgot what it was like to work for Miranda Priestly. That experience changed her. It shaped her. And now it is about to pull her back in. And Hathaway plays Andrea Andy Sachs, a journalist and Miranda's former second assistant, who becomes the new features editor at Runway. That is the thing. Andy is not just coming back to visit. She is coming back to work. She is going to be the features editor at the very magazine she once barely survived. That is a massive step. It tells you that somewhere in Andy, there was always a part of her that felt unfinished business with that world. She left it before it could leave her. And now she is choosing to return, this time on her own terms. The film takes its time establishing what Andy's life looks like now. She is a respected journalist. She has done meaningful work. She has a life outside of fashion. But the journalism world is also struggling. The film continues to explore the sad state of the media landscape, where respected outlets and journalists repeatedly fall into the clutches of the incompetent, with no respect, let alone passion, for what they are purchasing, inheriting, or taking over. So Andy is not coming back from a position of total comfort. She is also navigating a difficult world. The call from Runway is both a challenge and an opportunity. She weighs it, she thinks about it, and then she says yes. Now, let us move to Miranda Priestly. Meryl Streep steps back into those elegant shoes, and that silver hair, and that quiet voice that could cut glass. But this Miranda is not the same as the one we saw in 2006. Yes, she still has a presence. Yes, she still commands every room she walks into. But there is something underneath now, a vulnerability that was always there, but that she never allowed anyone to see. Now, the film asks us to look at it directly. Also present is Miranda's longtime fashion director confidant, Nigel Kipling, Stanley Tucci, still carrying out the same duties but yearning for a greater role underneath. Nigel is still there. Loyal, brilliant Nigel. Still at Miranda's side. Still doing extraordinary work. Still being underappreciated in certain ways. But in this film, we see that Nigel too has his own ambitions that have been quietly building over the years. His story gives the film an additional layer of warmth and complexity. Now we come to Emily Charlton. Emily Blunt returns as a woman who was once Miranda's first assistant. The woman who lived and breathed Runway, who wore impossibly beautiful clothes and spoke in a clipped British accent, and made no secret of her disdain for Andy when they first met. But look at Emily now. Look at how far she has come. Emily Blunt plays Emily Charlton, Miranda's former first assistant, who is now a senior executive at Dior. Emily is not an assistant anymore. Emily is a power player. She runs things at a major luxury brand. She has the kind of influence that people like her always dreamed of having. And she did it on her own terms. But here's the thing about Emily. She still has a complicated relationship with the woman she once dedicated her life to serving. Miranda gave Emily a career, but she also took things from her. She made promises and broke them. That history does not disappear just because the years went by. Emily harbors a grudge against Miranda and conspires with her billionaire boyfriend to buy Runway magazine, which Miranda desperately needs for advertising revenue as the magazine struggles amid the decline of traditional print media. So Emily is not simply an ally here. Emily is something more complicated. She has the resources that Runway desperately needs. She holds the keys to Runway's survival. But she is also the woman who was once betrayed by Miranda, and now she has the power to return that energy. Whether she chooses to save Miranda or let her fall, that is the question that drives a huge part of the story. We also need to talk about the villain of the piece, or at least one version of the villain. Kenneth Branagh plays Miranda's new husband, and while the film gives him a place in Miranda's personal life, there's more going on beneath the surface of that relationship. Power dynamics, personal ambition, and the complicated territory of a woman like Miranda allowing someone else into her inner world after all the years of standing alone. Miranda also has reason to believe that the company's CEO, Irv Ravitz, will promote her to a global role. Amid that looming possibility, the film continues to explore the sad state of the media landscape. So Miranda has something she is chasing, a global role, the chance to expand her power and her influence beyond what she currently has. This is a carrot being dangled in front of her. And like every great story about powerful people, the question is not just whether she will get what she wants, but what it will cost her to pursue it. The first act of the film builds all of this carefully. It reintroduces us to these characters and shows us what their lives look like now. It sets up the central conflict. Runway is struggling. Miranda needs a lifeline. Andy is the person she turns to. And Emily holds the resources that could save everything. 3 women, 3 histories, 1 magazine, 1 war. The middle of this film is where things get rich and complicated and genuinely exciting to watch. Andy arrives at Runway, and even though she is now an adult, an accomplished professional, a woman with confidence and experience, walking back into that building still hits her in a particular way. The memories are there. The way the assistants run around in panic. The way the whole office quiets when Miranda is near. The way fashion moves through the air like a living thing in that building. But Andy is not here to be overwhelmed. She is here to work. She is the features editor now, which means she has real authority and real responsibility. She has ideas. She wants to bring something genuine and meaningful to Runway, not just pretty pictures and empty trend pieces, but real storytelling, real journalism in a fashion context. That is a big vision, and it immediately puts her at the center of the battle between the old way of doing things and the new. The new way of doing things in this story is represented partly by the world of digital media and social media influence. The magazine is being told by the people above Miranda that it needs to go more digital, more influencer-driven, more algorithm-friendly. Miranda resists this. Of course she does. Miranda Priestley was born in a world where excellence and taste were the only things that mattered. The idea that a teenager with millions of followers online could somehow replace the considered voice of a great fashion magazine is something that Miranda finds genuinely offensive. The film does a great job of making the audience feel like we know these people. The characters feel lived in, and the problems they're facing regarding their fashion, journalism, and creative worlds are relevant and relatable. Artists expressing how much they hate AI through their art is a theme present in the film. Yes, artificial intelligence enters the conversation too. There are people in this story who suggest using AI to generate fashion content, to create designs, to write articles, to do the work that human editors and writers and creative directors have spent their lives mastering. Miranda's reaction to this idea tells you everything about who she is and what she stands for. She is not going to allow a machine to replace the human vision that she has given her entire life to building. Even the evils of AI are mentioned. As someone who knows nothing about fashion would say, that would be a terrible idea that would yield some truly monstrous designs, which are thankfully nothing like the actual dazzling costume design in this film. However, there is not a full commitment to diving into the bleakness of the media industry, and some punches are pulled. So the film raises these issues. It is not afraid of them. But it also does not go fully dark on them. It touches them, makes you feel the weight of them, and then moves forward with the story it wants to tell. Meanwhile, the situation with Emily is developing in ways that are full of tension and irony. Emily Charlton arrives in this story carrying years of complicated feelings. She was a young woman who gave everything to Miranda and to Runway. She starved herself to fit into sample sizes. She was loyal to a fault. She was Miranda's first and finest assistant. And then Miranda made a choice that changed Emily's career path. That moment, from the first film, where Miranda essentially cut Emily out a trip to Paris to take Andy instead, that wound never fully healed. It was professional humiliation at the hands of the person Emily admired most in the world. That kind of thing leaves a mark. Now Emily has power. Real power. She runs a major division at Dior. She leverages her position in a luxury group to challenge Miranda's authority. Emily has the money and the connections that Runway needs to survive. And part of her wants to use that position to finally turn the tables. To make Miranda need her. To make Miranda ask, for once in her life, for something that only Emily can provide. But here is where the film gets interesting, because Emily is not simply a villain here. She is not purely someone acting out of revenge. She is someone who loves fashion, who loves the industry, who actually cares about what happens to Runway even if she will never admit it out loud. The battle between Emily and Miranda is therefore not just about power. It is about two women who are, in some strange and complicated way, still deeply connected to each other. Andy finds herself in the middle of this. She came back to Runway to do good work. But she is now stuck between her loyalty to Miranda, who still has the ability to inspire awe and respect in Andy even after all these years, and her growing understanding that Emily might not be entirely wrong in her grievances. The personal life elements of this film add texture too. Apartment contractor Peter, played by Patrick Bramall, enters the picture as Andy's potential new love interest. While one understands the filmmakers wanted to flesh out her life beyond her work, that part unfortunately clogs the narrative a bit. That is the honest assessment. The romantic subplot for Andy is not the strongest part of the film. It is there to remind us that Andy is a full person with a life beyond the office. But it does compete for screen time that many viewers feel could have been better spent on the central conflict between the three main women. Adrian Grenier, who played Andy's boyfriend Nate, notably does not return. So Andy's past relationship is not revisited. That chapter is closed. She is moving forward, which is appropriate for a character who spent so much of the first film figuring out what she wanted. The film also takes us to Milan. Fashion Week. The sequence in Milan is one of the most visually stunning parts of the movie. The glamour is real. The costumes are extraordinary, and the energy of a fashion show brings the film to a different level entirely. When it's time for fashion to take center stage, complete with a smorgasbord of industry cameos, The Devil Wears Prada 2 marvels, whether it be the runway show itself or a rousing performance from a modern-day pop star. Fashion legend Donatella Versace and pop star Lady Gaga were spotted filming cameo appearances in Milan for The Devil Wears Prada 2. Lady Gaga's presence in this film is especially exciting. She contributes a musical moment that stops the film in its tracks in the best possible way. Her energy is right for this world. She belongs in a story about fashion and ambition and artistry. The Milan section is where many of the tensions that have been building come to a head. Deals are made. Alliances are tested. The question of who is willing to sacrifice what for the survival of Runway becomes very pressing. Miranda is forced to have conversations she would never have had in her earlier years. She is forced to consider things she would once have dismissed without a second thought. Throughout all of this, Nigel is watching. Miranda also has reason to believe that the company's CEO, Irv Ravitz, will promote her to a global role. Nigel knows about the possibility of this promotion, and he quietly, carefully, hopes that if Miranda moves up, there will finally be room for him to take on a greater role at Runway. He has waited a long time for that. He has been patient in the way that only truly devoted people can be patient. His story is handled with real gentleness, and Stanley Tucci brings so much warmth to it. The second act of this film is where the real meat of the story lives. The conflicts are not simple. Nobody is entirely right and nobody is entirely wrong. Everyone has a point. Everyone has a history. Everyone has something they want and something they are afraid of losing. That is exactly what makes it compelling to watch. Before we go any deeper into what The Devil Wears Prada 2 is as a film experience, we need to truly understand what it is coming from. We need to sit inside the legacy of the original for a moment, because that legacy is not just background information. It is the emotional soil in which the sequel grows. The year was 2006. The world of entertainment was in a very specific place. We were in an era before streaming completely took over. People still went to the cinema regularly for films that were not superhero movies. Female-driven comedies and dramas were fighting for space and budget in Hollywood. The idea that a film about women in the fashion industry could become a global cultural phenomenon was not something most studios were betting on heavily. And then The Devil Wears Prada opened, and everything changed. The film made over $300 million worldwide on a relatively modest budget. It received 2 Academy Award nominations, but more than the money in the awards, it did something that only the rarest films managed to do. It entered the language. It entered the culture in a way that felt permanent. Phrases from the film became shorthand. Miranda Priestley became a name that people use to describe a particular kind of terrifying, brilliant, impossibly demanding authority figure. The cerulean speech, where Miranda explains in devastating detail how fashion trickling down from the high end of bargain bin is not just commerce but culture, became one of the most quoted monologues in modern film. Why did it hit so hard? Partly because of Meryl Streep. Obviously. Always obviously. But it was more than that. The film spoke to something that millions of people recognize from their own lives. The feeling of being new to a powerful environment. The feeling of being judged by standards you do not yet understand. The feeling of slowly, almost against your will, beginning to care about the thing you once dismissed. And most painfully and honestly, the feeling of looking in the mirror one day and realizing that in becoming successful, you have made choices you did not fully consciously make. Andy Sachs was a mirror for an entire generation of ambitious young people. She was smart and idealistic and slightly judgmental in the way that young people often are about worlds they do not yet understand. And watching her navigate the impossible demands of Miranda Priestley's world was not just entertainment. It was a kind of education about ambition and identity and what the pursuit of success actually costs. So when the sequel was announced, the stakes were not just cinematic. They were personal for millions of people. They were going back to a world that had meant something to them. They were asking these characters to continue stories that they felt they already had a stake in. That is an enormous responsibility. And understanding that responsibility is what makes a filmmaker's return feel so significant. Let's spend more time understanding the journeys of these characters, because the sequel only works if you feel the full weight of what came before. When we left Andy Sachs at the end of the first film, she had just walked away from Miranda in the streets of Paris. It was one of the most powerful moments in the original film. Miranda was betrayed by the people around her. Her marriage was collapsing. Her position at Runway was being threatened. And in that moment of genuine vulnerability, she turned to Andy. And Andy, for the first time, showed Miranda that she would not simply do whatever was asked of her. She made a choice that honored her own integrity. She walked away, and Miranda, in the car afterward, let a tiny smile cross her face, because Miranda recognized something in that act. She recognized herself, in some way, in the young woman who refused to be fully consumed by the machine. That smile was one of the most debated moments in the original film. Was Miranda proud? Was she amused? Was she something else entirely? The film never quite explained it. It left it open. And that openness is part of what makes the story so rich. Now, 20 years later, Miranda is calling Andy back. Think about what that means. Miranda Priestley does not ask for things. She does not call people back. She does not reach out. She sends assistance and makes demands, and the world rearranges itself around her. The fact that she is seeking Andy out, specifically, tells you everything about how the landscape has shifted. Miranda needs something that she cannot simply command into existence. She needs someone she trusts. And the list of people Miranda Priestley truly trusts is very short. Andy comes back. And the fact that she comes back also tells you everything about where she is. She is successful. She is accomplished. She does not need Miranda in any practical sense. But she is drawn back anyway, because the unfinished nature of what happened between them 20 years ago still is a pull on her, because the world of Runway, whatever its flaws, represents something that matters to Andy even now, because she is curious about who she would be if she stepped back into that world as the person she'd become, rather than the uncertain young woman she once was. Emily Charlton's journey between the two films is the most dramatic of the three women. When we last saw Emily in the original film, she had just broken her leg in a traffic accident and missed her chance to go to Paris, the trip she'd been dreaming of and preparing for obsessively. Miranda replaced her with Andy. That is the wound, not just missing the trip, but being replaced, being passed over by the person whose approval she craved above all others, and being replaced by the person she had dismissed and resented from the moment Andy walked through the door. After that, Emily rebuilt. She clearly threw herself into work with the same ferocious dedication she always had, but this time channeling it into building her own career independent of Miranda. She went to Dior. She climbed. She became someone. And on the outside, everything looks like a success story. Emily Charlton took what Miranda did to her and turned it into fuel. That is a narrative. But underneath that, there is something that is not healed. You can build a whole empire on top of a wound, and the wound is still there. Emily has money and power and position, and she still carries the memory of being chosen second, of being looked at by the woman she admired most and found somehow lacking. That is not the kind of thing that titles and bank accounts fix. Nigel's journey between the films has its own particular sadness. Nigel is the most loyal person in this story. He has given Runway, and by extension Miranda, decades of brilliant creative work. He has been steady and reliable and extraordinarily gifted, and he has been rewarded, certainly. He has had a good career, but he has always existed in service of Miranda's vision rather than leading his own. He has been the most important person in the room, who was somehow never treated like the most important person in the room. His arc in the sequel is about whether that finally changes. Let us walk to the film's texture more slowly, scene by scene, moment by moment, to truly appreciate the craft involved. The film opens in a way that immediately signals what kind of sequel this is going to be. We are not starting with a celebration or a reunion. We are starting with difficulty, with reality. We see the modern media world in all its complicated messiness. A magazine meeting where people are arguing about engagement metrics and algorithm optimization. A room full of people speaking the language of clicks and impressions and content strategies. It is deliberately disorienting because you are being asked to feel immediately what would feel like for Miranda Priestley to walk into that kind of room. You are being asked to understand the gap between the world Miranda mastered and the world she is now being asked to inhabit. Then we see Miranda. And even in this disorienting context, the presence is still there. Streep does something remarkable in these early scenes. She does not play Miranda as someone who has been diminished. She plays her as someone who is choosing, deliberately, not to engage with the things she considers beneath her. There is a difference. A diminished person cannot engage. A powerful person chooses not to. Miranda is still choosing. But the film gently, persistently shows you that the world has stopped caring about that distinction. The early scenes with Andy re-establish her with wonderful economy. We see her doing her work. We see her being good at it. We see a life that has its satisfactions and its complications. The world of journalism that Andy inhabits in 2026 is recognizable to anyone who has followed the real news industry. Budget cuts, layoffs, the constant pressure to produce more content with fewer resources. Andy is doing meaningful work in a difficult environment. She is not unhappy, but something is missing. The film does not name it immediately. It just shows you the slight restlessness in Hathaway's eyes. The moment when Andy and Miranda reconnect is handled beautifully. It would be easy to make it too dramatic, to put too much weight on it, and tip it into sentimentality. The film resists that. Instead, the meeting is almost businesslike on the surface, with everything unsaid crackling underneath. Two people who know each other deeply, who have not seen each other in years, who affected each other's lives in ways that neither is fully reckoned with, sitting in the same room and pretending this is a professional conversation. It is one of the best scenes in the film. Miranda makes her case. Runway is struggling. She needs Andy's journalism skills, her credibility, her voice. Andy listens. You watch her thinking. You watch her weighing things. And then she says yes. Not immediately. not eagerly. But yes, the return of the runway offices is another beautifully handled scene, because the building looks the same in many ways, but everything feels slightly different. The energy is more anxious. There are young people at desks staring at screens in ways that are visually very different from the original film's frenetic but fashion-obsessed atmosphere. The world has crept into Runway, and Runway is not quite sure what to do about it. The first time Andy and Emily encounter each other in this film is a genuine delight. Emily Blunt arrives on screen and immediately takes complete command of it. Emily Charlton has grown into her authority in exactly the way you might expect. She is immaculate. She is sharp. She is in complete control of the impression she makes. But the second she and Andy are in the same space, all that control has to work very hard. Because there is history there. Real history. And history does not simply disappear because you have decided to be professional. Their early interactions are full of the kind of comedy that comes from two people trying very hard not to be what they actually are to each other. They are polite. They are correct. They maintain the appropriate professional distance. And the film lets you enjoy the performance of all that restraint while knowing perfectly well that it is not going to last. The scenes involving the business discussions about Runway's future are where the film's intellectual content is most concentrated. When people talk about what Runway means, what is represented, what it would mean for it to be diminished or sold or fundamentally changed, the film is asking the audience to consider genuine questions about cultural institutions. What do we lose when great publications die? Not just jobs, though those matter enormously, but the particular kind of voice that a great magazine had, the authority, the taste, the point of view that had been developed and refined over decades, that is not easily replaced by an algorithm. The AI subplot in the film, where someone proposes using artificial intelligence to generate content and even design concept for Runway, is played partly for comedy and partly for genuine alarm. The comedy comes from watching Miranda's reaction to this suggestion. The alarm comes from the fact that the suggestion is not ridiculous. It is the kind of thing that real executives at real companies are actually proposing in the real world right now. The film knows this. It lets the comedy land and then lets the weight of it settle afterward. There is a scene, described by early viewers as one of the film's highlights, where Miranda is forced to sit through a presentation about digital strategy delivered by someone who clearly has no idea who they are talking to. The presenter speaks in the language of clicks and viral moments and social media partnerships. Miranda sits perfectly still. She does not interrupt. She does not react visibly. She simply waits. And when the presentation is over, she says one sentence. Just one. And that sentence destroys every argument that has just been made with such precision and such clarity that the room goes completely silent. It is a Miranda priestly moment of the highest order. And the audience cheers for it. Because even in a world where Miranda's way of doing things is being challenged, you want to believe that genuine excellence and genuine taste still have the power to shut a room down. The trip to Milan comes roughly in the second half of the film, and it shifts the energy completely. Milan is not just a location. It is a statement. It is where fashion lives at its most concentrated and most beautiful and most serious. The city sequences are visually different from New York, warmer in tone, older in texture. The streets and the architecture providing a context that makes the film's obsessions feel historically grounded rather than merely contemporary. The fashion show sequence in Milan is the film's single most spectacular set piece. Multiple reviewers have singled it out as the moment where The Devil Wears Prada 2 fully justifies its existence as a big-screen theatrical experience. The clothes are extraordinary. The staging is magnificent. And Lady Gaga's presence in the sequence, as a performer whose own life represents the intersection of fashion and ambition and artistry at the highest level, elevates the whole thing beyond mere spectacle into something that feels genuinely celebratory of what fashion at its best can be. The cameos in the Milan section are part of its pleasure. Real figures from the fashion world appearing in the film adds authenticity. It connects the fictional world of Runway to the real world of fashion in a way that reminds you of the original film's roots in Lauren Weisberger's real experience working for Anna Wintour. The confrontation scenes between Miranda and Emily, which have been building throughout the film, arrive in Milan with real force. These are not simple confrontations. They are conversations between two extraordinary women who have a history that is too complicated to be resolved by a single argument or a single moment of honesty. The film respects that complexity. It does not offer easy resolution. It makes both women work for whatever understanding they reach. One of the most interesting aspects of these scenes is how the film handles Miranda's culpability. Miranda did wrong by Emily, not legally or professionally in any simple sense, but personally. She made a choice that prioritized Andy over Emily, and she has never acknowledged the weight of that choice or what it cost Emily. The film asks Miranda to do something she has never done in her life, to look at what she has taken from someone, and to say something real about it. Meryl Streep plays these moments with absolute economy. There is no big speech. There is no tearful breakdown. There is simply, at a certain point, a truth spoken in a very quiet voice. And that truth is enough. Emily's response to that truth is one of Emily Blunt's finest moments in the film, because Emily could have softened. She could have immediately forgiven. She could have let herself be moved in a way that would have been emotionally satisfying, but not entirely true to who Emily Charlton is. Instead, Blunt plays it with more complication than that. Emily does not immediately crumble. She receives what Miranda says with the particular grace of a person who has been waiting a very long time to hear something, and is now surprised to find that hearing it does not make everything simple. It makes it complicated in a new way. That complication is what mature storytelling looks like. That is a film that trusts its characters to be real people rather than simply vessels for emotional resolution. The music and its role in the story. Music in film is often underappreciated as a storytelling tool. In The Devil Wears Prada 2, the soundtrack does real work. The original film had a soundtrack that reflected its era and its energy. Sharp, fashionable, propulsive. The sequel needs to do something similar, but for 2026, and it needs to acknowledge that the world of fashion music and the world of popular music have both changed enormously in 20 years. Miranda engages with these arguments in the sequel in ways she never had to in the original. She cannot simply dismiss them. They are too serious and too widely shared. And watching her do so, watching her articulate why she believes what she believes to people who do not share her starting assumptions, is one of the intellectual pleasures of the film. Whether you ultimately agree with Miranda or not, her arguments are coherent and passionate and grounded in a genuine understanding of what fashion, at its best, actually does and means. Andy, as a journalist, as the feature's editor, is partly in the position of asking these questions on behalf of the audience. She is the person who can push back on Miranda without being destroyed by it. She is the person who can say things that nobody else in Miranda's world would dare say. And the conversations between them about the meaning and value of what Runway does are some of the most interesting exchanges in the film. The Devil Wears Prada 2 is not a film that announces itself as a feminist text. It does not make speeches about gender. It does not stop to explain itself. But it is, in a way that the best films about women's lives always are, deeply engaged with questions about what ambition means for women and what it costs. Miranda Priestley has been doing for decades exactly what male executives do in every industry without comment. She has been demanding. She has had standards. She has been unwilling to compromise on quality. She has been uncomfortable to work for in a way that truly driven leaders in any field are uncomfortable to work for. And she has been called a devil for it. The nickname in the title of these films is not incidental. It reflects a cultural judgment about women with power that is not applied to men with the same kind of power. In 2026, this has shifted somewhat, but not completely. Miranda is not unique as a female leader anymore in the same way she was in 2006. There are more women in senior positions. There are more female editors and executives and CEOs. The world has changed, but the double standard has not entirely disappeared. Women with Miranda's qualities are still viewed through a lens that is not applied to men with the same qualities. The sequel is aware of this. It acknowledges it not by making speeches, but by showing you. Miranda's position in the film is complicated not only by the digital revolution, but by the dynamics of gender and age and power in a world that still does not entirely know how to handle a woman of her particular kind of authority. The people pushing back against her are not only doing so because they disagree with her about strategy. Some of them simply cannot stand the fact that she is who she is in the way that she is. The film allows you to see that distinction. Emily's arc in the film is also a story about female ambition and what happens when that ambition is channeled through resentment as well as passion. Emily built her career partly on the fuel of being passed over by Miranda. That fuel works. It got her to where she is. But it also means that some part of her ambition has always been in relation to Miranda rather than entirely for herself. The sequel asks Emily, and asks the audience, whether she can separate those two things, whether her ambition and her grudge can be uncoupled. Andy represents a different model of female ambition, one that is more interested in integrity and meaning than in status and power for their own sake. She is not without ambition. She is deeply ambitious, but her ambition is oriented toward work that matters, toward telling stories that are true and important, rather than toward climbing a hierarchy. In 2026, that kind of ambition is still somewhat unconventional in the corporate world. The film celebrates it gently and without making too much noise about it. Every sequel lives or dies by a single question. Did it need to exist? Not commercially, not financially, but artistically in terms of story and character and meaning. Did it need to exist? For The Devil Wears Prada 2, the answer is yes. Not a thunderous, unconditional yes, but a considered and genuine yes. It needed to exist because the characters had more story to tell. Miranda, Priestley at the height of her powers, is one kind of character. Miranda, Priestley at the end of her era, fighting for her legacy, reckoning with the choices she has made, is a different and arguably more interesting character. The sequel gives Meryl Streep something that very few sequels give great actors: a genuine reason to revisit. It needed to exist because the world of 2026 has produced new questions that the world of 2006 had not yet asked. The questions about AI and digital media and the survival of great institutions and the tension between human artistry and algorithmic efficiency are genuinely new. Asking those questions through characters in a world that audiences already have an emotional investment in is a legitimate and valuable artistic choice. It needed to exist because Emily Charlton deserved more. The first film was Andy's story. It had to be. But Emily was always hovering at the edge of something more complex than she was given room to be. The sequel gives her that room. Emily Blunt fills it magnificently. That alone justifies the film's existence for many audiences. And it needed to exist because the relationship between Andy and Miranda, that strange and complicated and unnameable bond, was not finished. It had a gap in it. 20 years of gap. And there was story in that gap. The sequel finds and honors it. The Devil Wears Prada 2 suggests that as industries and their titans are brought low, the best we can ask for is the satisfaction of doing good work and the lasting friendships we may forge along the way. That is a quiet thesis for a film that is ostensibly about glamour and power in the fashion industry, but it is also a true one. And finding truth in the middle of all that style and spectacle and noise is what this film, at its best, manages to do. Miranda Priestley is still here. Older, yes. Facing things she did not expect to face. Yes. Wearing extraordinary clothes in the face of everything. Absolutely yes. But most importantly, she is still here. Still fighting for what she believes in. Still refusing to accept a world that does not meet her standards. Still choosing excellence even when it would be easier to give in. There is something in that refusal that feels genuinely worth celebrating. Not blindly. Not without acknowledging everything it has cost. But worth celebrating, because in a world that is moving very fast and valuing things increasingly by how quickly they can be consumed and discarded, the idea that some things we're fighting for, worth protecting, worth giving your life to, is not a small idea. It is a very big one. And The Devil Wears Prada 2 wraps in the most beautiful clothes in the world and puts it on screen for 2 hours and asks you feel it. And you do. You really do. The book was closed in 2006. It has been opened again, and it turns out there were more pages than anyone knew. The third act of The Devil Wears Prada 2 brings everything to a point. The threads that have been carefully laid through the first 2 acts now pull tight. The confrontation between Miranda and Emily is the emotional centerpiece of this section. These 2 women, both of whom are extraordinary, both of whom built their careers on discipline and passion and an unwillingness to settle for anything less than the best, finally have us stand in the same room and say what needs to be said. Emily has the power here. She has the funding. She has the ability to ensure Runway's survival or to walk away and let it die. Miranda, who has spent her entire life never asking anyone for anything, has to face the reality that she needs Emily. She needs a woman she once dismissed. She needs the assistant she once passed over in favor of someone else. This moment, when Miranda has to genuinely reckon with the weight of the choices she made years ago, is one of the most emotionally powerful things in the film. Meryl Streep plays it with extraordinary precision. There is no big dramatic breakdown. There is no loud outburst. Miranda is not that kind of person. Instead, there is a quietness, a look, a slight softening in the famous steel of her face. And in that quietness, there is everything. The New Yorker's Justin Chong wrote that The Devil Wears Prada 2 is selling a truckload of preposterous goods, but it sells them awfully well, with unfeigned assurance, conviction, and the appropriate ratio of cynicism to hope. As industries and their titans are brought low, this film suggests the best we can ask for is the satisfaction of doing good work and the lasting friendships we may forge along the way. That observation from a critic is worth sitting with for a moment, because it captures something real about the tone of the film's final section. The movie is not naive. It knows the world is hard. It knows that print media is genuinely in trouble. It knows that ambition has costs and that power changes people. But it also believes in something. It believes in doing good work. It believes in the relationships that form between people who share a passion. And in the end, it asks those beliefs to carry the story home. Andy plays a crucial role in the resolution of the conflict between Miranda and Emily. She is the bridge between them. She is the person who understands both women. She worked for Miranda and was transformed by that experience. She worked alongside Emily and developed a complicated but real connection with her. Andy can see both sides of this conflict in a way that neither Miranda nor Emily can fully see on their own. Andy uses that position, not manipulatively, not with calculation, but honestly. She says things that need to be said. She pushes both women to look beyond their pride and their wounds and their competing ambitions. She asks them to consider what they actually want, not just what they think they want or what they think they deserve. This is what Andy does best. She has always been the heart of this story. She is the person we follow because she sees things clearly. The fashion show sequence in this part of the film is spectacular. It brings together everything the story has been building toward in a visual and emotional crescendo. The clothes are extraordinary. The staging is magnificent. And in the middle of all that beauty and spectacle, human beings are making decisions that will change their lives. Between that glamour is a mostly fun tale of ambition, sometimes vocal, sometimes repressed, that is as interested in journalism's rough waters as it is in sincerely revealing new layers to these characters. The resolution involves Runway finding a path forward. The deal between Miranda and Emily's luxury brand group does come together, though not without compromise from both sides. Emily gets something she has wanted for years, and I do not mean money or power. She gets acknowledgement, real acknowledgement from Miranda. And for Emily Charlton, who spent so much of her youth trying to earn that woman's respect, that moment carries enormous weight. Miranda, for her part, faces a question of legacy and letting go. The possible global promotion from Irv Ravitz becomes something she must evaluate honestly. Is this what she actually wants? Or is it just another version of the same drive that has kept her running for decades without ever stopping to ask what all this running is actually for? And Nigel, loyal, wonderful Nigel, his moment comes in the third act too. The film rewards his patience in a way that feels genuinely earned. The details of what exactly happened for Nigel are part of the pleasure of watching the film, and it would be unkind to spell it all out completely. But those who love the character will leave the theater feeling good about where he ends up. The ending is optimistic. Some critics find this slightly frustrating. They feel the film could have committed more fully to the bleakness that the media landscape truly deserves. There is not a commitment to diving into the bleakness of the media industry, and some punches are pulled, making room for an overly optimistic happy ending that will unquestionably leave some slightly frustrated. Perhaps it is a win that The Devil Wears Prada 2 addresses such harsh realities at all, even if it is softened. That is a fair critique. The film chooses warmth over despair. It chooses to believe in the possibility of these women, these characters, finding their way to something good. Whether you find that satisfying or slightly too easy depends largely on what you came to the film looking for. Now, let us spend real time with the characters, because these are not just plot devices. These are fully realized human beings, brought to life by extraordinary actors. Miranda Priestley is the most complex figure in this story. She always was. In the first film, she was largely written as a force of nature, terrifying, demanding, cold in ways that could take your breath away. But even in that film, the cracks showed. The scene in the hotel room, the moment of genuine human vulnerability, the way she looked at Andy as a successor, not just as an employee. Miranda was never truly a monster. She was a person who had built a monster-like exterior to protect something very human inside. In The Devil Wears Prada 2, those cracks are wider. Miranda is older. She is approaching the end of a great career. And the film is honest about what that feels like. The world does not need her in the same way it once did. Technology has changed the landscape. The people above her are using words she does not fully speak. Digital, algorithm, engagement. These are not the words of the world Miranda built her life in. Meryl Streep is extraordinary here. She does not play Miranda as a declining figure, not in any pitiful sense. Miranda still has immense dignity. She still commands any room she enters. But Streep finds a sadness in the character in a way that feels real and generous. She lets you see that underneath the silver hair and the withering remarks, there's a woman who has given everything to something she loves and who is now being asked to reckon with whether that sacrifice was worth it. The new marriage to Kenneth Branagh's character add a layer of personal life to Miranda that the first film barely touched. Miranda's personal life in the original was mostly glimpsed in the form of twin daughters and a husband who felt like a stranger. Now she has someone new beside her, someone who represents a different chapter. Branagh brings a certain theatrical presence to the role, a man of confidence and self-assurance, someone who is not intimidated by Miranda in the way most people are. Their dynamic is interesting to watch, and Hathaway as Andy Sachs is effortlessly warm and intelligent. The Hollywood Reporter's chief film critic David Rooney wrote that Hathaway is effortlessly charming in the role. She makes you believe immediately that this is the same woman from the first film, just 20 years later. Andy has grown into herself. She is not performing confidence, the way she sometimes was in the first film, trying to fit into a world that was not hers. Now she genuinely belongs in any room she walks into, and yet she still has that openness, that willingness to feel things and say them, that always made her different from the people around her at Runway. Andy's growth is also about her relationship with ambition. In the first film, she had to learn that ambition is not a dirty word. She came in thinking fashion was shallow and found out it was as serious and demanding and human as anything else. In this film, she has made peace with that. She can hold ambition and integrity at the same time. She does not see them as opposites anymore. Emily Blunt as Emily Charlton is perhaps the most unexpected joy of this film, because Emily in the first film was largely comic relief and dramatic foil. She was funny. She was sharp. She was memorable. But she was not the emotional center of anything. In The Devil Wears Prada 2, Emily gets a real arc. She gets genuine depth. And Emily Blunt, who has become one of the finest actresses of her generation in the years between these two films, takes full advantage of every moment she is given. Emily is not simply angry. She is not simply bitter. She is someone who has achieved real success and still carries the wound of a moment from her past that she has never fully been able to let go of. There is something deeply human about that. Most of us have something like that. A moment where we were dismissed or overlooked or underestimated by someone whose opinion we cared about too much. Emily has built an empire in the shadow of that wound. And the film asks, quietly and seriously, whether she can put it down. The Devil Wears Prada 2 is a worthy, entertaining sequel that offers more than just nostalgia. That description applies most clearly to what the film does with Emily. It takes a character who could have been used purely for nostalgia value and gives her genuine new things to do and feel and become. Stanley Tucci as Nigel is pure pleasure from first frame to last. Tucci has always been wonderful in this role. He brings wit and warmth and particular kind of insider wisdom to Nigel, the man who knows how everything works and loves it all in spite of itself. In this film, Nigel's desire for more recognition and greater responsibility gives him more dramatic material than he had in the original. And Tucci handles it beautifully. He never plays the yearning in a sad way. Nigel approaches his own unfulfilled ambitions with the same grace and wry humor he applies to everything else. The new characters bring fresh energy. The performances from Simone Ashley, Lucy Liu, and others in the ensemble add texture to the world of Runway. Helen J. Shun plays Jean Chow, Andy's assistant. This character drew controversy before the film's release, which we will address later in this script. Justin Theroux plays a character whose precise role in the story is kept somewhat mysterious in early reviews, but he clearly brings something sharp and contemporary to the film's exploration of the media landscape. What is most impressive about this ensemble is a sense of lived history between them. You believe that these people have known each other for decades. The way Streep and Hathaway share scenes feels like two people who have a real and complicated relationship that has existed for 20 years. The shorthand between them, the things left unsaid, the looks that carry whole conversations. This is rare in sequels. Usually, the chemistry of the original is hard to recreate. Here, it feels not recreated but continued. On the surface, The Devil Wears Prada 2 is a movie about fashion, about a magazine, about women in powerful positions doing battle over the future of an institution. But that is not really what it is about. It is about time. It is about what happens when the thing you built your life around changes so completely that you cannot fully recognize it anymore. The media landscape that Miranda has mastered is disappearing. The skills she has spent a lifetime perfecting are being devalued by forces she cannot control or fully understand. That is not just a story about fashion. That is a story about every person who has ever watched the world move on from the thing they dedicated themselves to. It is about pride. Miranda's pride is both her greatest strength and her most significant limitation in this film. Her pride built Runway. Her pride kept it at the top for decades. But her pride also kept her from seeing certain things clearly, from saying certain things, from acknowledging certain people. And in this film, she has to decide whether her pride is more important to her than the people and the institution she actually cares about. It is about ambition, and whether ambition is ever fully satisfied. Emily achieved everything she set out to achieve after leaving Runway. And yet she came back into this story. She could not stay away. Her ambition brought her back into Miranda's orbit. Because ambition, the real kind, is never really finished. It is always reaching for the next thing. The question the film asks is whether that constant reaching is a blessing or a curse, or both at the same time. It is about loyalty and what we owe the people who shaped us. Andy owes Miranda something, not in a transactional sense, not money or professional allegiance, but something more personal. Miranda looked at a young woman who did not know what she was capable of and saw something in her and pushed her toward it. That is a gift, even when it comes wrapped in cruelty and impossible demands. Andy knows this, and that knowledge is what brings her back. It is about the media itself. The film takes seriously the question of what happens when great journalism institutions die or are diminished. The film explores the sad state of the media landscape, where respected outlets and journalists repeatedly fall into the clutches of the incompetent with no respect, let alone passion, for what they are purchasing, inheriting, or taking over. That is a real thing happening in the real world right now. Magazines shutting down, newsrooms gutted, websites being bought and destroyed by people who see them only as assets to be flipped rather than as voices that matter. The film is angry about this in a quiet way. It does not let that anger take over the story, but it is there. It is about the question of what comes next. All three of the central women are at a crossroads. Miranda is near retirement and must decide what her final chapter looks like. Andy is back at Runway and must decide what she actually wants from this return. Emily has power and must decide what to do with it. All three of them are standing at a moment where the next decision shapes everything. And underneath all of these themes is something simpler and more universal. This film is about what it means to be a woman in a world that asks women to be perfect, to be ruthless, to be strong, to be ambitious, and then judges them harshly for being all of those things. Miranda Priestley has always been a symbol of that. She does what male executives do every day, and she is called monstrous for it. She has standards, and she is called difficult. She is demanding, and she is called a devil. The sequel does not ignore this. It acknowledges the weight that women like Miranda carry, and it acknowledges that the weight is real even if the way some women carry it causes damage to others. David Frankel directs The Devil Wears Prada 2 with the confidence of someone who knows this world completely. He built it the first time. He knows where the light comes from. He knows how to make New York feel like the center of a universe and how to make a fashion show feel like a religious experience. The film is shot beautifully. Manhattan in all its complexity and contradiction. The offices of Runway with their clean lines and their overwhelming sense of taste. Milan with its entirely different kind of beauty, warmer, older, more layered. The cinematography serves a story without ever calling attention to itself. The visuals feel glamorous but not empty. They feel like part of the film's emotional vocabulary. The costume design is, as it always is in this world, extraordinary. The outfits, particularly Miranda's, are just as important as the performances. That is not an exaggeration. In a film about fashion, the clothes are a form of communication. What Miranda wears tells you what she is feeling and what she is projecting. What Andy wears tells you where she is in her journey. What Emily wears tells you exactly how powerful she has become. The costumes are storytelling. The soundtrack deserves special mention. The second trailer for The Devil Wears Prada 2 included a preview of Runway, an original song performed by Lady Gaga and Doekiai. The track, which shares its title with the fictional magazine led by Miranda Priestley, featured a house pop style. That song, and Lady Gaga's presence in the film itself, add a musical energy that the film benefits from enormously. Gaga is someone who understands the intersection of fashion, ambition, and performance at the deepest level. Her involvement feels organic, not like a celebrity cameo inserted for its own sake. The editing keeps the film moving at a good pace for most of its nearly 2-hour runtime, although some critics feel the Andy romantic subplot slows things down. The comedic scenes are well-timed. The dramatic scenes are given room to breathe. The balance between laughs and genuine feeling is handled with skill. The performances are the film's greatest technical achievement. Each of the 4 leads brings something irreplaceable. Streep is, as she always is, operating at a level that seems somehow beyond what is humanly possible for an actor. Hathaway matches her. Blunt surprises in the best possible way. And Tucci provides a warmth that keeps everything from getting too cold and sharp. No honest discussion of this film can avoid the controversy that arose before its release. On April 16th, 2026, 20th Century Studios released a promotional clip of the film on its official YouTube channel, featuring the character Andy Sachs, portrayed by Anne Hathaway, alongside her Asian assistant, Jean Chow, portrayed by Chinese-American actress Helen J. Shun. The depiction of Shun's character drew criticism for its racist portrayal, as online observers noted that the character's name bore phonetic resemblance to a racial slur. This controversy is real and significant. It emerged just days before the film's premiere and generated genuine anger from Asian communities and many others. The criticism is not trivial. The naming of a character in a way that echoes a racist slur is the kind of thing that should not happen in a major studio film in 2026. The question of whether this was careless or something worse is one that the filmmakers and the studio have had to answer publicly. The controversy does not erase the film's other qualities, but it cannot be ignored either. Part of watching and discussing The Devil Wears Prada 2 honestly is acknowledging that this happened, that people were rightfully upset, and that it represents a failure somewhere in the production process. In a film that features a story about a powerful woman of great taste and exacting standards, this particular failure is especially jarring. The studio responded to the criticism. The conversation continues. But for many viewers, particularly Asian American viewers, this element of the film sits uncomfortably alongside everything else. The critical response. Critics have received The Devil Wears Prada 2 in ways that are generally positive but with reservations. On the review aggregator website Rotten Tomatoes, 77% of 111 critics' reviews are positive. Metacritic, which uses a weighted average, assigned the film a score of 61 out of 100, based on 46 critics, indicating generally favorable reviews. 77% on Rotten Tomatoes, is a solid score for a legacy sequel. It is enough to say that the film works, that it is genuinely enjoyable and worth seeing, while acknowledging that it is not a perfect film, and that some critics have legitimate complaints. In a negative review, Moira McDonald of the Seattle Times wrote that the film gives us a lot to look at, and Hathaway and Blunt in particular are a pleasure, but it's flat champagne, maybe worth drinking in a pinch, but unsatisfying. Randy Myers of the Mercury News wrote that yes, it is indeed a pleasure to hang out with these characters again, and there are a few good laughs here and there, but The Devil Wears Prada 2 feels like it came off the rack before it was ready. It feels about as groundbreaking as Florals in Spring. Those are cutting but not entirely unfair descriptions. The flat champagne metaphor is apt in some respects. The film does not fully commit to the darkness that its subject matter invites. It is enjoyable, and it does not quite reach the cultural impact of the original. Whether that is a failure or simply the inevitable fate of most sequels is a matter of perspective. On the more positive side, it is hard to imagine anyone who is a fan of the first film being disappointed with The Devil Wears Prada 2. It is funny, charming, and filled with genuinely heartwarming payoffs. The Devil Wears Prada 2 is described as a worthy, entertaining sequel that offers more than just nostalgia. That is the key phrase. More than just nostalgia. The film earns its existence not simply by bringing back beloved characters, but by giving those characters real new things to do and say and feel. It asks genuine questions about the modern world. It takes its characters seriously as people rather than just as beloved icons from the past. The audience response has been enormously enthusiastic, especially from fans of the original. It was reportedly the most viewed comedy trailer in 15 years, with 181.5 million views in its first 24 hours alone. The film's first full trailer, released on February 1st, 2026, recorded 222 million views within its first 24 hours, which 20th Century Studios described as the most viewed trailer in the studio's history. Those numbers are staggering. They tell you the level of anticipation that existed for this film. People wanted it. They had been waiting. And the trailers delivered on the promise of what this reunion could be. In April 2026, Streep and Hathaway traveled to South Korea to promote the film and participated in an interview with singer Jang Won-young. The global promotional tour reflects the global appetite for this film. This is not just an American story. This is a story about ambition and power and fashion and what women are capable of, and that story translates across cultures and borders. The ending and the question of the sequel. The ending of The Devil Wears Prada 2 is, as noted by critics, perhaps too warm and too neat for the harsh realities the film spent much of its runtime exploring. Runway survives. The deal with Emily's luxury group goes through. Miranda does not lose what she loves. Andy finds her place. Nigel gets his moment. Emily gets her acknowledgement. Is it a happy ending? Yes, largely. Does it feel fully earned? This is where opinions genuinely divide. Some viewers will feel that after 2 hours of watching these characters navigate real and difficult challenges, the warm resolution is exactly what they came for. Others will feel that the film set up something more complicated and then step back from the full consequences of what was building toward. An overly optimistic happy ending will unquestionably leave some slightly frustrated. Perhaps it is a win that The Devil Wears Prada 2 addresses such harsh realities at all, even if it is softened. That is likely the fairest reading. The film is not naive. It is not pretending the problems do not exist. It is choosing, deliberately, to offer hope alongside the difficulty. And there is something genuinely cinematic about that choice. Sometimes we go to the movies to be reassured that good things are possible. Sometimes we need to believe that great institutions can survive, that good people can find each other across years and wounds and competing ambitions. The Devil Wears Prada 2 offers that belief. As for a sequel, the ending does not close any doors. One review mentions a possibility of a third film, with the title Devil Wears Prada 3. The world of Runway feels alive and ongoing at the film's conclusion. The characters have room to continue their stories. Whether a third film actually happens depends on many factors, including box office performance and the willingness of the cast to commit to another round. Given the extraordinary reception to this film before it's even finished its opening weekend, and given the massive trailer viewership numbers, It seems very likely that 20th Century Studios will be having those conversations soon. The post-credits, if there are any, have not been confirmed in detail before the script was written. The film reportedly does not rely on a Marvel-style post-credits tease. It tells its story and lets it stand. That is appropriate for a film of this type and this pedigree. The original Devil Wears Prada, released in 2006, became something more than a movie very quickly. It became a reference point. People who have never seen the film know who Miranda Priestley is. They know the cerulean speech. They know what it means to be that assistant who has to get the impossible thing done. The movie entered the culture in a deep way and never left. In 2026, making a sequel to a film like that is an act of enormous cultural confidence. You are not just making a movie. You are touching something that people hold close. You're going back to a world that people love. The risk is immense. The potential for disappointment is real. And yet the filmmakers, and crucially the cast, chose to do it. They chose to trust the material and the audience. The fact that Meryl Streep, an actress famously selective about her choices, agreed to do this sequel tells you something important. The knowledge that Meryl Streep broke her no sequels rule for this film was a strong indicator of its quality. Streep has spent a career making extraordinary choices. She does not chase money or nostalgia for their own sake. She says yes to things that matter to her artistically and personally. Her return to Miranda Priestley means that she found something new and meaningful in this story, and that, for audiences, is a tremendous vote of confidence. The film also arrives at a moment when the issues it raises are more pressing than ever. Print media is genuinely in crisis. AI is genuinely threatening creative industries. The tension between old institutions and new digital realities is genuinely unresolved. The Devil Wears Prada 2 is not a film that exists outside of time. It is a film that is speaking directly to the world it is being released into. That gives it weight beyond simple entertainment. The fashion industry itself continues to be a fascinating lens through which to examine larger cultural questions. Fashion is about identity, about how we present ourselves, about what we value and what we signal about ourselves through the choices we make about how we appear. A film that takes fashion seriously, that treats it as a genuine art form with genuine stakes, is doing something more interesting than it might appear on the surface. No serious engagement with this film is complete without spending real time on the performances. Meryl Streep as Miranda Priestley. This is Streep at her most concentrated and most controlled. The famous quiet voice. The way Miranda's displeasure registers not in volume, but in temperature. A room cools when Miranda is unhappy. Streep never raises her voice to achieve an effect. She lowers it. She slows it. She makes the words fall like ice. And then in this film, she allows something to melt. Just slightly. Just enough. The scene where Miranda genuinely acknowledges something she has withheld for too long is one of the finest moments of Streep's career, which is saying something extraordinary given how many fine moments that career contains. And Hathaway as Andy Sachs. Hathaway is doing something more complicated in this film than simply playing an older version of the same character. She is playing a woman who has fully become herself and then chosen to walk back into a place that once threatened to unmake her. There is confidence in Andy in this film that the first Andy was still working toward, and yet the vulnerability is still there. When Hathaway and Streep share a scene, there's a push and pull between them that feels like genuine history. You believe these two women know each other. You believe the layers of their relationship. Emily Blunt as Emily Charlton. If there is one performance in this film that most consistently surprises audiences, it is Blunt's. Emily Charlton was always a great character, but she was largely played in the original for a sharp comedy and as a foil for Andy. Here, Blunt is given a full arc of a person with genuine grievances and genuine desires and genuine courage. The moment Emily stops performing confidence and lets you see the person underneath is the kind of thing that great actors do in the best films. Blunt earns that moment completely. Stanley Tucci as Nigel. Tucci is a connective tissue of this story. Nigel is the person who has been there the longest, who knows the most, who has the most invested. Tucci plays him with such affection and wit and occasional quiet sadness that you cannot help but love him completely. The scenes between Tucci and Streep are especially good. Two people who have worked together for decades and know each other in the bone-deep way that comes from shared history. Kenneth Branagh brings gravitas and a certain dramatic weight to Miranda's husband. Branagh is an actor who commands space naturally, and placing him opposite Streep creates an interesting balance of forces. Their scenes together show a Miranda who is something other than an icon, a Miranda who is, in private, still figuring out what she wants from her personal life. Branagh handles this without ever threatening to dominate. The supporting players, Simone Ashley, Lucy Liu, Justin Theroux, all bring professionalism and specificity to their roles. None of them feel like background figures. They feel like people with their own stories happening slightly outside of our frame. Let us bring everything together and answer the simplest question. Is The Devil Wears Prada 2 worth your time? It is worth watching because Meryl Streep gives a performance that will be discussed and remembered. It is worth watching because Emily Blunt does something unexpected and wonderful with a character that has always deserved more attention. It is worth watching because Anne Hathaway makes Andy Sachs feel fully alive and fully present in a way that honors the original performance while adding new depth. It is worth watching because the film takes on real questions. The death of print media. The threat of artificial intelligence to creative work, the price of ambition, the weight of pride, these are not trivial concerns. The film raises them honestly and engages with them thoughtfully, even if it ultimately chooses warmth over bleakness in its resolution. It is worth watching because the fashion and the visual world of the film are genuinely gorgeous. The Milan sequences, the runway show, the extraordinary costumes, all of this is cinematic pleasure of a high order. It is worth watching because it makes you feel something. Whether that something is joy at seeing beloved characters reunited, or sadness at what the film reveals about the price of devoted ambition, or something more complicated and personal that you cannot quite name, the film delivers genuine emotional experience. The film is funny, charming, and filled with genuinely heartwarming payoffs. Is it perfect? No. The romantic subplot for Andy dilutes the central story somewhat. The ending may be too optimistic for the realistic portrait the film has been building. The controversy around the naming of Andy's assistant represents a failure that should not be glossed over. These are real imperfections. But perfect is a very high bar for any film to meet. The Devil Wears Prada 2 does not need to be perfect to be excellent. It needs to honor the original while justifying its own existence. It needs to give these characters something real and new to do. It needs to make you feel the 20 years that have passed and to believe that these people are worth following into this next chapter of their lives. By all of those measures, it succeeds. It more than succeeds. It delivers. It delivers what fans of the original wanted, without being merely a nostalgia exercise. It delivers performances that could stand in any company. It delivers a story that is genuinely connected to the world we are living in right now. And it delivers that rarest of things in a Hollywood sequel. A reason to have made it. A justification that goes beyond the financial case and reaches instead toward the artistic one. The conclusion. The Devil Wears Prada 2 arrived in 2026 carrying an enormous weight of expectation. 20 years of cultural affection for the original. The presence of Meryl Streep in a role she is famous for having not wanted to revisit. The question of whether lightning could strike twice in exactly the same place. All of these pressures could have crushed the film before it began. Instead, the film walks into all of that expectation with a particular kind of confidence that comes from knowing what you have in your hands. David Frankel knew these characters. Aline Brosh McKenna knew the story. And Meryl Streep and Hathaway, Emily Blunt, and Stanley Tucci knew these people from the inside out in a way that no amount of preparation and talent alone could manufacture. Coming 20 years after the 2006 dramedy, this sequel follows the original, which was adapted from Lauren Weisberger's 2003 novel of the same name. Weisberger famously drew inspiration from her time working as former Vogue editor-in-chief Anna Wintour's assistant. The roots of this story are real. They come from a real person's real experience of real power and ambition and fashion. That authenticity has never left the franchise. It is still there in the sequel, grounding all the glamour in something that feels human and true. The world of 2026 is asking the same questions that the world of 2006 asked, just in sharper, more urgent forms. What do we value? What do we sacrifice for ambition? What does it mean to do work that matters? What do we owe to the institutions and the people that shaped us? What happens when the world we build our identities around begins to change faster than we can follow? The Devil Wears Prada 2 does not answer all of these questions. It is not that kind of film. It is a comedy drama about a fashion magazine, and it remembers that even as it reaches for something larger, but it asks the questions honestly. It sits with them, and it offers at the end not easy answers, but something more valuable. The suggestion that good work, real relationships, and genuine passion for what you do still matter, still count for something, still have the power to carry people through the hardest transitions. Miranda Priestley, the woman who wore Prada and wore it like armor, is still standing at the end of this film, not untouched, not unchanged, but standing, still defining her own terms, still refusing to disappear quietly. And there is something genuinely moving about that. Something that goes beyond fashion and sequels and box office numbers and critical scores. There is something genuinely human about it, and that, in the end, is what cinema at its best always comes back to. The human thing underneath all the style and spectacle and noise. The person behind the persona. The truth underneath the outfit. The Devil Wears Prada 2 finds that truth. Not perfectly, not without stumbles along the way, but it finds it. And when it does, it is worth every one of the nearly 2 hours you have spent in its company.